there's a couple of other things I want to ask you about or talk to you about that go back to October 7th. Now, we've talked about October 7th over the weeks. Of course, in the US and Western media and of course, Israeli propaganda, they emphasize the atrocity propaganda. They don't talk about the military achievement of the resistance, which overwhelmed the Gaza division, took several of its bases and destroyed them, captured and killed Israeli soldiers, including senior officers and so on. And also the drone footage that Hamas published at the time showed them using drones to drop bombs on sophisticated Israeli surveillance equipment, on automated machine gun nests, and other things, destroying tanks, dropping bombs on tanks. And I'm bringing that up because that, I don't know if it was ever really shown in Western media, but it is, there is this effort to overwhelm us with this atrocity propaganda about that Hamas went out to deliberately butcher as many innocent Israelis as they could. And we were the first English language publication at the Electronic Intifada to start kind of systematically taking that fake narrative apart. I'm going to call it a fake narrative because that was not the nature of the Hamas operation. It was a military operation in which certainly civilians were killed. That was the first big story we did on just over a month ago. But let's look at a couple of very recent stories just from the last few days. The first one we're going to look at is just from Friday, and there's a little video clip in that story, Tamara, that let's try to play. Just the clip that is embedded in that story of Mark Regev, who is one of the most well-known Israeli government spokespersons. And Mark Regev was speaking to Mehdi Hassan on MSNBC. It was a long interview of about 30 minutes. I watched the whole thing, but just play that clip in the that's in the embedded tweet there, if we can, Tamara.
We had the number at 1,400 casualties, and now we've revised that down to 1,200 because we understood that we had overestimated. We made a mistake. There were actually bodies that were so badly burnt, we thought they were ours. In the end, apparently, they were Hamas terrorists. When we make a mistake, we admit it.
All right. So now, what happened in that video is very interesting, very significant, because remember, what we've been told since October 7th is that these monstrous ISIS-like Hamas people went in and burned. Netanyahu said that they bound people up and burned them beyond recognition. Never explained how they could have done that with the light weapons they had. No one has said that Hamas was carrying flamethrowers or napalm or whatever you would use that would be able to burn people to that extent. But just look at what Mark Regev said, because remember, we discussed in a previous live stream how Israel officially reduced its death count of its citizens, or its civilians, not civilians, its citizens, so it includes civilians and military, from 1,400, which is the number that the media have been repeating without any question. You know, everyone accepts their number, but they reduced it to 1,200. And what is Mark Regev's explanation for that? He says, you just heard it, that there were about 200 bodies that were so badly burned, we thought they were ours. But then after we did whatever, testing they did, they found out they were Hamas fighters. Now, how is it possible if they were Hamas fighters, how did they end up being burned beyond recognition? Nobody is suggesting that the Hamas fighters set themselves on fire. So they can only have been killed by Israel. And Israel knew that, but thought that many of them were Israeli civilians. So it means that Israel knew that they had indiscriminately fired on hundreds of people without knowing whether they were Israeli civilians or Palestinian fighters. And that is consistent with what we know about the weaponry that was in play. On the one hand, you had the Hamas fighters with AK-47s, or at the most rocket-propelled grenades. We did see some footage of Hamas fighters carrying, 1 or 2 rocket-propelled grenades on their back, but nothing Tamara, are you able to zoom in on that photo at the top of the story that's on the screen? Or maybe it's clear enough for people. But this is a photo from Kibbutz Be'eri, and this is a photo of the aftermath. And there was nothing, absolutely nothing, that the Palestinian fighters were carrying that could have produced this kind of mass destruction in this kibbutz or the other settlements. This had to have been done with Israeli weapons and tank shells.
Yeah, there's especially that footage there. There's absolutely no question. We've seen the weapons that the Palestinians have. Like, they have thermobaric grenades that could burn people, but they wouldn't burn themselves. And they wouldn't, we've seen them on camera. We've seen, at this point, I don't even know how many. We've seen 25 or 30 videos of, multiple Yasin warheads being fired, and they're not taking down a building into rubble like that. No, I mean, it's quite obvious that the Israelis don't care about their captives. Like, they didn't care about them on October 7th, and they still don't care about them today. They're showing drone footage of them sitting outside of where they're claiming that their people are, but they're not going down day after day to go and get them.